I have a PPT that is by way of a virtual walkthrough, and it has embedded videos of the actual, a video taken in the space. So that will take you through the space, because we can do justice to the works in a very different way online and in presence in a real space. So for those of you who are around Alibag, I would urge you to go there. But for those of you who are not there, this, I think, hopefully is exhaustive as an immersive experience. I mean, this title, Searching for the Present Where, has a lot of implicit philosophical presuppositions. As a philosopher, coming in conversation with these particular later works, figurations of Gaur Padamsi, that were done between 1995 and 2006, was for me like an exploration on the side. It was almost like me shadowing Akbar Padamsi, trying to unravel or unpack what atmosphere was being created intellectually, philosophically around the works. Akbar Padamsi, but his works are present with us, and I mean, I think that is an honor to be engaging with them at this occasion. His artistic practice was expansive, was entangled in several questions, uh, perhaps tacit, implicit, subtle, as much as they were stated. And more than questions, I would say, however, his works appear to be searches. This exploration through this exhibition unfolds not just through his material works, but his larger intellectual curiosity for the nature of reality, be it through reflections on time, space, the order of things, and the experience of the self as much as the other. A metaphysical preponderance can be seen in Padamsi's thinking on human configurations, in his drawings and photographic work that were made between 1995 and 2006. The subjects depicted in these figurations appear like notes on a page for his artist's search for presentness and what it may mean. Art history is testimony to contestational legacies of the genre of the nude portraiture, as well as representation. The tradition of the artist engaging with the human form in the nude is highly signified within these historical meshes, entangled in debates around idealism and realism. Historically, this genre therefore became a critical site for several turns of the avant-garde. Engaging with the human form in the nude in contemporary times cannot be distanced from critical intersectional questions. These discourses give us also sufficient grounds to hesitate in preserving a tradition in its archaic generic form. So conceptually refiguring the nude as also simply the body also risks undermining the role of other possible forms that embodiment can take. So in this curatorial complex, the human forms are addressed as subjects, as beings and selves, in keeping with the ethical commitment to Padamsi's thinking and intellectual affinities. If you were in the space, you would read this curatorial note. What I will do is I have embedded these notes up besides the works later, so you will hear me read this out. But if you wish to revisit it, I can always come back to this. And this is in the space. So when you enter, we would see these two works, the works we just paused upon, and move on to this section where we look at beings, the embodiment of what does it mean to just be, right? So what are the tussles and confrontations we may encounter when any kind of systematization is applied to the embodied subject? So have we ever been able to see a person as a person and nothing else? Or where maybe find that chosen dissolution of a self? When can we become a quote unquote sahridaya that we call as a concept where there is a collective dissolution of self into something more than an individual singular. And when are we ready for that? What makes us stop, look away, hesitate, judge, or indulge in a work of art? These are some of the tasks that Padamsee sets us on. These drawings and photographs can therefore offer us a sense of the place of the body as a site for being and becoming. Okay. And we will visit this wall virtually now. This is in the space. Caught in reveries, as if lost in thought, pondering over a made decision, sleeping in anticipation of a difficult day, or just tiptoeing so as to not wake a sleeping one. These subjects come to us absent-mindedly, entangled in their domestic meshes. We are kept away. We aren't present to them. They seem to have not noticed us looking at them. Okay? And so these moments have been shared with others, yet there is no direct gaze encounter between us. So these are selves that don't need speaking for, that they speak for themselves. They're in their worlds and we share them. There is an unsaid sharing. And then there are sudden awakenings, where one may, as if broken from worldly reveries, walk out of time, space, meaning, language, and be completely present to the world. A presencing that obliquely confronts us, haunted by the traces of a socially signified life. And here you see these figures are not backgrounded. They are foregrounded, singular in space and time. They just exist. And but they're also, there is a history to them. They're either just walking away, just sitting, looking away, sleeping, thinking about something, or struggling to sleep, perhaps, scratching their head. And there is this everydayness that is beautifully enmeshed, which I called a domestic time and space, especially in the central work, for example. She has a bindi, and that bindi is a very distinct presence in the entire, her entire subjecthood. And so we look at these beings enmeshed, yet sharing with us a certain way of being, right? But these are figurations and subjects set in motion, right? They are not quote unquote bodies, they are more than that. In this worldview of the self, perhaps social signifiers, location, even speaking of the body may, I think, be superfluous. Embodiment is presupposed here. So we are understood as embodied subjects. So the interest, therefore, here is to look for when and where these embodiments become present to us. So definitely there is a waiting for an engagement where there is a recognition between us and the work and these subjects. A painter philosopher and a thinker's artist. Padamsee's figurations are accented by philosophical thinking on power, transcendence, perception, and in varying intensities or registers, appear to be tussling with the long-standing double bind, again, of being and becoming. And if you see in the space, the way in which these works have been grouped, the photographic works were mostly backgrounded with a darker shade, almost in a duality of light and darkness, day and light, day and night. And so being and becoming kind of faced each other as a dual being. Also because Padamsee's interest in duality, which is evident in a conversation he has with Homi Bhabha, that is an ode to his interest in understanding this kind of dialectics. So all the works are grouped. Very rarely is a work singular presented. And of course, we're at the moment. I, as a curator, for example, had this challenge of trying to understand, as someone who was engaging with Padamsee's work for the first time, what grounding, what ethical standing do I have as a curator in relation to these works? And for me, the most ethical way of doing it was to present the works to speak for themselves and shadow Padamsee in his intellectual thinking, or try to come as close as possible to a kind of intentionality that was perhaps playing out with these works with him as an artist. So these works appear to us both as gestures as well as mirrors. And so they give us an opportunity to perceive this dialectics of being. They're not so much abstract as they are intentional, but they need us to speak to them before they speak to us. The abstractions emerge from the attention to process. Sensed amidst this, there is a dance with an elusive time. Time emerges in a spurt with the photographic works. Time is almost perseverantly created in the drawings with repeated lines being drawn. So the larger atmosphere of the work that emerges here is also guided by two brief conversations with Bhanumati Padamsee, for whom I'm very grateful, Akbar Padamsee's wife and longtime companion, and as well as two key texts written by Geeta Kapoor. One is Geeta Kapoor's Akbar Padamsee, The Other Side of Solitude, and the other one is a conversation between Homi Bhabha and Akbar Padamsee, which is titled Figure and Shadow. So Homi Bhabha and Geeta Kapoor have been key guiding interlocutors, and for them I'm grateful to access the life and persona of Akbar Padamsee through these works. So as a curator, for example, the first question that one may think of is, one is first to get rid of the subject-object dichotomy, right? So there is that one challenge that was the most present for me as a curator, to think about these as beings and selves. And so how would I try to unsettle this subject-object dichotomy? And the way in which I try to do it is by using a mode of deterritorialization. It's a strategy or an idea that is often used, for example, in Deleuzian philosophy, where significations are shifted. We look at elements of each work coming into relation with each other, and hopefully we look at the emergence of a collective sense of the works and not just the singular works itself. So there is that line of play as well. And so what does it mean to see something as it is, right? I think that was also, that is a challenge that these works put to us. The works reflect a formality in method. They are very formal in their interest, but there is a light undercurrent of a desire to transcend a givenness of things. So his beings are simply present. So we could, for example, as a philosopher, we talk about discerning perception and non-discerning perception of the artist, right? And we can see this at play very well in these works. So we are given a window to see as is, or an opportunity to see as is, as well as can be, right? So perception in the context of Akbar Padamsee's figurations is directed towards this kind of emergence that a moment of encounter provides. The body as an occasion for subjecthood is also perhaps most elusive. It resists to be seen for what it is, as opposed to what it stands for. Perhaps because it breathes, it thinks, and may choose its condition if free. We see in Padamsee's photographs these almost dialectical presences, forms that are caught in between movement, amidst the fall of light and shadow, perhaps not so interested in too many things. In being as is, one may then glimpse becomings, a becoming mountain, a becoming cloud, a becoming light. Caught in reveries, pondering over decisions, sleeping in the anticipation of a difficult day. So these, therefore, become a dialectic presence in relation to our beings that are caught in becomings. The genre of the nude. Wait, we will just go through the physical space. And so we have seen our beings, we have seen them waking up and walking away, entangled in their domestic meshes. And then we look at the possibilities of becoming. These are the photographic works, and they are displayed as groups of two. And I particularly like that the works are reflected within each other. So we cannot singularly look at these works from any angle, especially the photographs. Now, of course, we come back to the question of the genre of the nude in art history. So it has been a critical semantic ground in art historical discourse for the arguments on the subject and the object, on the real and the ideal. For and in most art historical writing, everybody goes back to referencing Kenneth Clark on the nude because of his seminal work. But of course, we have to refigure it, and that's where I am interested in reconfiguring how we even understand the genre of the nude. For Kenneth Clark, for instance, the nude is an ideal form and not a subject. This Platonic distinction between the naked and the nude, however, reveals a very different kind of commitment attributed to the work of art. This, I suggest, may not help us in understanding the Indian modern artistic search through human figurations and the human form. The rebuttal of John Berger, for example, to Clark's idealized vision of the nude would be maybe one step towards critiquing it, where he says Kenneth Clark maintains that to be naked is simply to be without clothes, whereas the nude is a form of art. Signposts a rupture from the safe dissociation of art's work from lived experience, and Berger observes that nude is always conventionalized and insists that it also relates to lived sexuality. The female nude is subservient to the male's spectator owner, and the men act as well as the women appear. So Berger is sort of throwing a mirror at actual lived experience of sexuality as a wake-up call for not engaging in the genre of the nude in any kind of a dissociated format. And for that is helpful and sort of a wake-up call for us as well to take the opportunity to reconfigure it in our context, in our present context. So be it through works of Manet, for example, or Duchamp, Amrita Shergill, or the Bombay Progressives, amid several others, the nude became a site for a lot of critical turns. And engaging with it in contemporary times, of course, raises critical questions such as one is identity, sociopolitical location of our gaze. Now, the gaze here is multifold. It's not just the gaze of the viewer, it's the gaze of the subject in the work, the gaze of the artist towards subject, and the gaze of the viewer towards this complex of gazes. And in a gender diverse, queer, affirmative, socio-political atmosphere, post the cancellation of Section 377 of the IPC and post the Me Too movement, we must take this as an occasion to reaffirm a polygendered subjectivity. We must take this occasion to reinstitute the dignity of the subjecthood at the center of these human relations, right? And so it is an occasion for us to outgrow duality of looking at gender discourses, even in the art history of the Indian moderns. So history of the body and its depictions in visual art history slowly now can begin to relinquish its indebtedness to the dichotomous binary vision that pervaded the reading of the moderns across the world, also in the Indian context. So, for example, in a very recent young upcoming artist, Saulius Novares, he practices his practices around the prejudices of the body. He speaks about the spiritual interpretation of the body that is no longer a convention, right? So he talks of the new that has become a platform for expressions for marginalized young artists who do not see themselves respected or reflected in the conventional canons of art history. So contemporary art and eroticism find themselves in an oddly ambiguous relationship with innumerable artists addressing the subject in new ways. So this critical discourse gives us grounds to kind of eschew the genre of the nude, and therefore we look at these as beings. And looking at it philosophically, and we have just gone through this corner of the space, we will move on to the next space. Now, there are two spaces in the gallery. So this was the first space, and now we've entered into the next. Looking at these works in terms of the philosophical, sociological, linguistical, political entry into understanding bodies, right? And as an intellectual tradition of inquiry, we may notice that there is a differentiation, there is a shifting of elements uh, as the light and shadows are being played with. Okay, so here we look at dialectic cadence between signification, designification, resignification. Again, this is the same thing when I spoke about deterritorialization. That is one way in which elements that offer themselves of there is no longer an obligation to represent a person or a body, but then to present it as an occasion for freeing it, to emancipate it and make it something more than what it is. And so we definitely see that these works also have a very performative element to it. The model is moving, it's always captured in motion. And the ways in which these photographs were taken, uh, there were, for example, the only very few instances where Padamsee talks about how he did these photographs, and he came to his photographic works much later in his life as an artist. And they were a series of 40, 50 shots, and then he would pick one of them. But that one that he picked would often always have these sort of memories of the entire moment. It's like a condensation, a palimpsest, that Homi Bhabha calls it. So as we turn into the second space, we will now look at how these works give us an occasion to try to understand Padamsee's interest in order, in form, perception, and also eventually his understanding of sentience and subjectivities. Let me just take you through the physical space. So now we come to his stance, which actually is very beautifully talked about in Geeta Kapoor's essay, where she talks about this sort of a position of uncompromised solitude. And this entire node, I would peg it on the notion of discernment. So disinterestedness as a concept was, for example, put into motion by this philosopher called Immanuel Kant. And as he contemplated on the possibility of aesthetic judgment around a flower. So for Kant, the idea of disinterest implied not apathy. Disinterest is not basically I don't care. It just implied an equanimous kind of interest, one that enables us to perceive and judge the flower for its beauty. However, Padamsi perhaps is not so interested in declarations of judgments as he is in understanding the subject for what it is. So this is where I'm trying to differentiate the kind of distance, sort of practiced distance that Padamsi often implies or applies to his works, especially in the photographic works. Uh, Padamsi practices distance intentionally, as if creating an assemblage in order to expand his and the perceiver's perception manifold. This conscious distancing is also seen in his method. So, where she talks about it as a position of uncompromised solitude, the remoteness of the viewer is deliberately maintained in these works, kindling them to a pitch of intensity which may not start a widespread conflagration of the show, but which is sufficient to ensure that there is a deep inner glow that will pass from image to image. So this position of uncompromised solitude, something that there you will definitely see that none of the figures are interested in us as viewers. They're not looking. They're not looking back. And for those who are aware of art historical traditions, most of the avant-garde movements have always been about confronting the gaze of the viewer, the model looking back, uh, trying to question our gaze on the subject. But here, definitely, as you spend more and more time with these works, that's why I like that quote by Geeta Kapoor, where she talks, there is a kindling, this not a widespread conflagration. So it is a soft transference of some kind of an intensity between work to work, moment to moment, image to image. And so these are more of image works, I would say, than photographic works. So he's working with very simple elements, the light, the shadow, working with what is not seen as much as what is seen, and of course, a movement of the subject in ways that are sort of disinterested. And so this is that wall of the second space where you would ideally be walking through. Let's try to go there. So my intention as a curator has generally just been to create the atmosphere through which we can access this work. But the ways in which you access each work is a very private, is a personal one. And here I think this is a very interesting idea that Padamsi writes in his essay Reflection on Form, where he talks about organization and orchestration. His interest in the form of known objects, for example. So he says organization, orchestration are means, not plastic ends. We create order to give significance. If order becomes an end in itself, it would die a semantic death. So the prevalent choice of black and white, there's an economy of colors, for example. So these are all extensions of this conscious discernment, very simple elements can offer us. And that's what is reflected in his, again, extending his interest in the form. Okay. And this, for example, it's a challenging one. If one tries to understand the interest in form with Padamsi, he at one point very straightforwardly says for him, the human body and the apple both are the same kind of form. So for him, he doesn't discern in any extra way how he would associate with an apple or a rose or a thing, as he would discern or how he would associate with a being. Now, uh, s- uh, in the object-oriented social theories, for example, this would can be easily tried to, this can be easily reduced to being an objectification of the form of the human body. But then, if you try to actually understand the interest in the process of his work and his earlier works in the form and figuration and him coming into this photographic work now, towards the end of his artistic trajectory, then you see that the interest is not in that at all. The interest is in trying to understand what a moment can give through the photographic lens. So the elimination of the function of certain senses. He's interested in the sort of like deconstruction of elements and order. So something new can come in an economy of things. And their absence of function by an equivalent plastic presence enriches the language of art. So he is interested in form and feeling, but he's also committed to sort of taking his subject to its highest possible being, highest possibility of being. So he's not interested in pinning down to certain representational obligations in these works. So Homi Bhabha sees his black and white works, his photographic works, as a precursor, as a sort of an extension conceptually to his gray period. Akbar Padamsi had, his, and towards a later time of his life, had a time called the gray period of his works, where he sort of moved away from color and just practice or exercise in monocolor or one color. And so uh, while looking at the conceptual precursor to these works, he talks about this gray zone and his interest in just black and white as something that is reflective of his interest more and more towards the philosophical mode of understanding the world. There's this word called delayed unconscious. So he uses the word delayed unconscious that seems to appear in his drawings and in the repeated lines that almost reinforce the subject throughout the duration. So also another conversation between Bhabha and Padamsi, Padamsi admits that the technology of photography offers him a greater philosophical ease, right? So in watercolors, I work from nothing to something. In photography, it is the other way around. Everything is given and he has to discern something out of it. And this particular quote by Padamsi is also very revealing, it's self-explanatory. The eye becomes recipient, an organ of transit. Those who see nothing have nothing to see. The spectator who from his honey bowl exclaims, "How lovely," is a liar. Few artists are able to co-create histories of the subject alongside the history of the body. And in these works, by the body not being a simple passive site where subjectivities are recognized, there's a creation of subjectivity or coming into being. So these then may then willingly choose to face us, turn away from us. Sometimes they even look beyond us. Okay, there's this sort of a nonchalance. No one's looking directly at us. And Padamsi therefore appears to respect this presence of the power that exists in these subjects and the power that they exercise, perhaps to show it or to show an absence of or their powerlessness. So generally, throughout these works, when you look at these beings, in a quieter frame of mind, when you're just like spending time with them, that's what happens in a gallery space. You spend time with these works, and through the process of me also spending time with these works, you sort of sense a kind of a new understanding of subjecthood that perhaps Padamsi was trying to come to. And that, I think, when you look at these and you look at his earlier works of still life, for example, still life portraits of everyday objects, and then the landscapes, his metascapes that were most well known, you slowly see that there is this emergence of understanding of sort of an understanding of subjectivity in a very particular Padamsi way. So my curatorial probe was to try to understand what kind of philosophy Padamsi is offering us through his works. And it is definitely a new kind of subjectivity, which is free, which is empowered, which also is not uh, using a direct way, but they're using oblique ways to recognize each other relationally. So that is something that was very evident in the larger collective emergence of the self in these works. And this is the final part or portion of the gallery where we try to perhaps sense what kind of a metaphysics is coming into emergence through these works. And in philosophical, intellectual traditions, the body and ideations of the body and emotions and feeling are deeply connected to also traditions of thinking about landscapes. We have the Sangam poetry, we have Raga Rasa, we have also deeply imaginative, very rich cosmological imaginations of the world in some South Asian philosophical traditions. And so you definitely see that, okay, there is an expanding of the body is what a landscape is also what the sun and moon could be, what something what a flower could be, what a small cup in your kitchen could be. So there is life in everything. So that kindle energy that Gita Kapoor talks about, uh, it is restrained, it is sort of moderate, but it exists in each figuration. And if we see that in this register, we see each works, especially the drawings, for example, you just get a sense of how, in that moment, Padamsi brings to life, makes present to us a certain way of being, a certain way of becoming. So I leave you with a poignant quote on Grey by Homi Bhabha. Sort of has a very nice atmosphere to it. So Homi Bhabha says this about the color gray in relation to Padamsi's gray period. Is gray the color of the unconscious, something misty that throws a kind of deceptive mask over both memory and reality? Gray always preserves a certain uncertain transparency. Gray allows you to dimly perceive the ghosts that haunt you, the desires that passed you by. And yet, gray allows you to believe that something will emerge, something will come through for you. Gray is art's atmosphere, a climate of perception. So with that, I think I will leave you uh, through my verbal walkthrough virtual of this virtual show.